Hi, I'm Roberta Glass, and welcome to my channel. Today we have on Meredith Elizabeth to talk about the confession tapes and the Burns Rafay case. Stay tuned. Meredith Elizabeth, I am so excited to talk to you about this case because you are an aficionado of the they didn't do it, agenda-driven, innocent documentary. So this documentary on Netflix, which is a multi-part, we're just talking about the 2 episodes on the Burns Rafay case called True East. Of the confession tapes, thank you. Called True East, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, how, as far
as... And thank you for having me back, by the way.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I love it. This was a good one.
Yeah, a really good one. And so, how did this rate as far as convincing in this genre?
I give it a 5 out of 10. It's really not, when I finished watching it, I was unsure. I wasn't, Making a Murderer was much more convincing. The second and third, Paradise Lost, much more convincing. When I finished watching this, I was like, it's possible. But I wasn't convinced of their innocence by any stretch.
What usually happens?
Well, usually, they could have done a better... I think what they were doing with the confession tapes is raising how much possible doubt there was and not so much that they're innocent.
Right. That's a really good point. But usually, you told me with, Making a Murderer, you got enraged, you were going to write letters.
I was outraged.
Yeah. So, just to give the audience an idea... Usually you're outraged, you're ready to write letters, but you check it out first. You check out the facts first before you write anything, and then, of course, you realize that you've been bamboozled.
And usually pretty quickly it takes, and I think that most people, if you go into it saying, if I wanted to be outraged and go online and never look at anything else and just watch Making a Murderer, then I wouldn't look at anything else. But I get curious and I read a lot about it, and usually pretty quickly, within probably 10 minutes, you can see that they're guilty. And I think I enjoy the feeling of being bamboozled by good directors.
So you were a little bit, you thought this was a 5. I noticed on some of the YouTube videos about this case, and this is a case of 2 Canadian young men, Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay. And Atif Rafay's family had moved from Canada to Washington State in the U.S. And they went for a visit, both of them, these 2 friends. And during that visit, the entire family was murdered, his 2 parents and his autistic sister, Bosmia.
Yeah, and, the other thing I want to mention is usually after, you'll watch these things on TV, you'll look them up, and I was convinced that there was more evidence that they didn't present, because that's usually what they do in these innocence, quote-unquote, documentary projects, and they just leave out a ton of evidence that was presented against them at trial. What I found interesting about this one is they really didn't leave anything out. And what's more interesting is when you read all the post-conviction motions is all they really had was this confession. Mm-hmm. And when they came to the United States and the courts looked at whether or not the confession should be entered in, and I have mixed feelings over if it's legal in Canada and it's not legal here, should we be entering it in a court in the U.S.? Right. And I'm not sure we should. Generally, if our police aren't allowed to do it, then we shouldn't enter it into our courts. But they did. And if the confession wasn't entered, they would have really nothing on them.
Yeah, very little. It's a heavy behavioral case, that made them their behavior really made them suspects, wouldn't you say?
But that's not, that's sketchy behavior. It's bizarre. It can be explained by very well-paid psychologists, but they didn't have anything directly linking them to the crime.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting case. And really, had Sebastian not been such a ridiculous human being, they also may have been found not guilty. But he's very unlikable.
True. But he did have, his whole family is behind him, which is, not so unusual. But he does have some girlfriends and friends that are interviewed in this, former, girlfriends that are interviewed that are just convinced of his innocence. Do you believe that they're really so convinced, or do you just think that they're saying they're making a good show to try to get him out of prison?
They really focused that the one girl that he dated in high school, and when he came back from the crime, he went to see her that night, and when he got back from Canada, and I don't know what she believes, and I don't know if she, and he's also unbelievably manipulating, and he's able to convince people to do things that are not a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Hence his lawyer. So I think that he probably can convince people that he didn't do it and to feel badly for him. And from what I understand, he's had a very difficult time in prison.
Yes.
And his behavior has been very, very bad. And he is not good at following directives, and he is very rebellious against authority.
Right.
And he has spent most of the time in, solitary confinement. He's seen a bunch of psychiatrists. I think he's been on hunger strikes.
And he's also been on a whole bunch of antipsychotic medication. And if you see pictures of him, his hair is long with a long beard, quite different than the clean-shaven, clean-cut sort of look that he had on trial. So that is a really good segue into, I wanted to talk to you about the two convicted characters we have at the center of this. We have Atif Rafay and we have Sebastian Burns, who seem opposites. What is your take on both their personalities? You just went into Sebastian a little bit, but what about Atif, and what do you think brought them together?
That's interesting, because I have no idea why they were friends. I can't figure that out. When you hear, Sebastian apparently, he was a good-looking kid. He, when you see pictures of him as a teenager, he was athletic and he was very smart, and high school was his heyday. He did have friends, he did have girlfriends. So I'm curious, and when you hear Atif speak, he sort of seems, he's 5'2". I looked it up.
Wow.
And they put him in protective custody only because of his size. So he's had I don't want to say a nice experience in prison, but he's in a nice protective custody purely because he's 5'2". So wow. I don't know what would have attracted the two of them. I could see why Atif would want to be friends with Sebastian.
And Sebastian is quite tall, no?
Yeah, he's 6 foot. So he went to general population, which is a lot harder than protective custody. But I don't know what drew Sebastian to Atif. Because Atif doesn't seem to have he's very bright, very well-spoken, but, from a kid with a lot of friends and a lot of social life, what about Atif drew him to him?
Mm.
And I can't figure it out. Unless the only thing I can think of is that Sebastian liked to dominate people, and he could see that this kid, when he came in, he could easily manipulate.
Interesting.
But I can think of nothing else.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me when I was reading the court documents is that when Sebastian Burns was talking to the undercover cops, as we'll get to, he kept referring to him and his friends. For someone who's so narcissistic, I was surprised by that. Me and my friends, we're some of the smartest people in the world. Me and my friends, we would kill for each other. So he saw himself really as part of a group.
Well, and also, I think at that point he may have been trying to get the mafia people, quote unquote, to believe that his friends, because he's also saying, I think during that time that, you can trust these people, you can trust them. I trust them with my life.
True.
So for whatever reason, he was trying to convince them that his friends are good people and his friends are in the loop. And that may have been because he believed that in order to get the evidence against him for them to tamper with, was they needed to also trust his friends.
Okay.
Which is bizarre, too, because I don't know why he would believe that.
Mm-hmm.
For such a smart kid, he seems so stupid.
So what was the motive of this crime? It was constantly brought up that the two were going to make they wrote a screenplay, and it was about people who were falsely accused and convicted, or just accused of a crime, and that they were trying to get money for that.
I think they wrote that. You know what I think the motive was?
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you exactly what I think it was.
Okay.
Sebastian in high school was known as one of the smartest kids, very bright. I think he was like an athlete. He was in the play. So he was like the perfect kid who seemed to be going places and should have been going to an Ivy League school. He went to a community college. Atif, on the other hand, went to Cornell, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Cornell?
Yes.
I could be wrong.
Yes,
it was
it's
Ivy
Cornell.
League school.
Yes.
And I think what happened was Sebastian was jealous. And Sebastian thought that he should be at at an Ivy League school, that he should be much more important than a community college. And I think that's why this happened. Because he realized, if I don't have money, I'm not going to be anything. And I think he must have had some secret resentment against Atif, because Atif was living what should have been his life.
And it's interesting that this continues on, that Sebastian Burns is doing terribly, and Atif Rafay is involved in getting his education and degrees and programs and, doing very well in prison, and Sebastian is just, again, sinking.
And I think that Sebastian sees it as that if I had money, that's where I would be.
Okay.
I would be living the life I should be living. But I think he saw it as Atif's family has money. I don't know the financial situation of the Burns. I hear the father speak. I don't know what accent that is.
I know. Fred Walsh described him as his George Plimpton-esque father, which I thought was so perfect.
It's almost like an impression of Mr. Howell from Gilligan's Island. I've never really heard anyone speak. I don't know what accent that is, and it's absurd.
It is. Anyone, please, in the comments, what is that accent?
I've never heard it, except for it seems like it's a bad impression of Mr. Howell from Gilligan's Island, and I keep watching him saying, what is that? I think they're English, but something happened with his accent. But what I'm thinking is that Sebastian obviously is a narcissist. He believes he has these delusions of grandeur, and I guarantee you, for a kid in high school who was seen as one of the most popular kids, he believed he was the brightest kid. He was unbelievable. He believed he should have been at an Ivy League school and more important than a community college. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I think he saw stopping him from being where he should be, in an Ivy League school with the smart people, is money. Mm-hmm. So how is he going to get money?
So let's talk a little bit about what happened that night. So, first off, these two have an alibi, right? They went went out to get something to eat. They went to see the Lion King.
Yes, the Lion
right,
King.
as every young man wants to do.
Sure. Every 19-year-old boy wants to go see the Lion King.
Yeah, especially, and I think you had looked up what other movies were playing, and what were they, like Speed and...
It was like Speed. There was a couple good ones. Wyatt Earp.
City
there was
Slickers 2 was another one.
But it's one of those where, is it like, because even when, like, there's a couple stories of them going to the movies, so it's possible that they went to the movies all the time and saw everything. I don't know. It sounds absurd, but like the rest of this case, it's possible.
Possible, but I have a feeling that it was chosen because of when it was playing. Like, that would be the perfect time, because the prosecution's theory is that they went to the movies and snuck out in the middle and then went other places so they would have an alibi. And
that theater, Sebastian says, oh, we didn't have time to run across town. Apparently it was 10 minutes from the house.
Yeah.
So that's
good point.
Not when I imagine across town, and he's a smart kid. He uses specific words for specific reasons. So when you say it's across town, you're imagining half hour, 45 minutes.
True.
You don't think 10 minutes.
True. Even in New York, going cross town for me
is like 16 hours.
Right, a long time. Yeah.
Pack a lunch.
Right. Pack a lunch. Absolutely.
You're going to be traveling for the day.
So.
But the other thing is, the only other thing I can think of is it's a very easy plot line, The Lion King. And these kids thought of everything, and it must have occurred to them that the cops will ask, well, what happened at the end of the movie?
They did, yeah.
And if they ask them questions about the movie, the plot line's so easy, you could read a summary and be able to answer questions about it. Speed is a little bit more complicated of a plot line, so they may have chosen it just because it's a simple, easy plot line to remember if ever asked about it.
Very insightful point. So
this is all it could be.
Well, I think it's a great theory. So they get back to the house and make Sebastian makes a 911 call where he says, I think that there's been a break-in and there's blood all over my friend's father's face, and come quickly, we're so scared, we'll be outside. We're too scared to be in here. But they go through the house, and they don't mention that Atif's sister is still alive and moaning. And in further questioning, he said, well, I can't even get a Band-Aid. I couldn't help her. They said, well, didn't you want to check her? He said, I didn't want to hear that, meaning his sister's moans, and he just ran. That's what he said. I just ran. So there they are outside with his sister who could possibly be saved. They never say anything. The cops come. They never say that there's someone who could possibly be still alive, which he was in there. And I find that incredibly disturbing.
Yeah, and I actually read somewhere that Atif thought his sister was gross.
Yeah.
And the word gross was in quotation marks. And that was very telling to me. He obviously, we all have issues with our siblings and things about them. However, I don't think, to call somebody who's severely autistic and your family member and your sister gross, and that's how you feel about them and describe them to others that way, is unbelievably sociopathic and insensitive. Most people would not describe their sibling who's severely autistic and would say the word gross. And I don't know anyone. Mm-hmm. I don't know anyone who would hear their sibling, especially one who's defenseless, especially one who can't help herself, mm-hmm. moaning and not go in and help her or try to help her. Mm-hmm. And for the only real issue, people react in very different ways. For him to say there was a break-in, well, if they didn't do it, there was a break-in. Mm-hmm. I've never been in this situation, but I imagine I'm pretty loose with people saying things on 911 calls mm-hmm. because everybody reacts differently. You don't really know. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I really took issue with that whole night was Atif saying, oh, I didn't go in and check my sister because I don't even know how to put on a Band-Aid.
Yeah, he didn't check any of them. He didn't check his father, whose head was so bashed in that the medical examiner likened it to a bowling ball being dropped from several stories onto a human someone's head. That was this. It was so intense, and the other relatives who saw the crime picture said it was just horrifically awful. The police officers at the scene said it was the worst of the worst. So that'll kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about here. And anytime anyone can be saved and isn't, just from my experience, as someone who's been in that position of needing help and almost dying, I'm very sensitive to someone not even attempting to help someone. So whether it's Brendan Dassey or whether it's Atif Rafay.
95% of the population, if they heard somebody moaning in the next room, they would go in even if it was a stranger.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't explain why anybody would hear their own sister moaning and walk out of the door and wait in the front. And what's interesting is one of the neighbors said that before the cops came, the two of them, when they were outside smoking cigarettes and looked like they were having a casual conversation.
Amazing.
And they would have never guessed that there were 3 murders that they just witnessed inside. And then the cops came and then their behavior changed. That was very interesting.
Right, too. So Sebastian Burns was seen grabbing his stomach and making grimaces right in front of the cops. Atif was very quiet, and when he was asked questions, got very fidgety. So
that could be, if you had just, let's pretend they didn't do it and you just witnessed your parents being murdered, I think you would be in a state of shock.
Okay.
I think and then him not wanting to answer questions, when they're asking questions about the murder, that would make him visualize what he saw.
Mm-hmm.
And his reaction is very possible psychologically, because if you saw your father, there was brain matter on the wall. And if you had witnessed your father in that state and your mother and your sister, you would be in shock.
Okay.
So I'm willing to give him that. It's possible that you would just be in shock, and every time they ask questions about it, you have to now visualize that memory and be uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different ways how people would react to that. They did a pretty good job the first 2 days.
Right.
Overall, because their behavior becomes more strange when they get back to Canada.
Okay, so
in my opinion, at least.
I'm just going to respectfully disagree with
Absolutely.
everyone reacts differently. I think everyone does react differently, but there is a spectrum of behavior that we recognize as appropriate. Even when someone is shut down, we have a way of being able to recognize hurt and pain that's pressed down, but that line always comes up when people are acting so off the spectrum of what is considered of what is expected, and it's always people who are accused of murder. You know what I mean? That line comes up. Well, everyone reacts differently.
Also, Atif was raised in an Indian family,
okay.
And men don't show weakness. Men don't cry. That's part of the culture, that you don't show weakness. You don't cry in public. It depends on what experiences you carry with you.
Right.
And and people react people react very differently.
Okay.
And I think, and you have stages of grief where one of the stages is denial, and you're denying it's happening. So when and the thing is, there's people that they first suspect their behavior because it's so bizarre, but then they found out in 2 days somebody else did it.
True.
So I think there's such a range of spectrum of behavior that people handle things so differently. I know people that see something horrible and don't want to think about it and want to just laugh and not accept what happened.
But
they're adults.
We're not just looking at the behavior, though. We're also looking at the actions and what they say, too. And there's so many things that are incongruent. For example, Atif never reached out to his relatives to let them know.
Well,
not only did he not touch any of his...
seems like adults, but
okay.
you have to... if he's in denial And he doesn't, I could easily see a teenage boy who just lost, I absolutely think he did it. And I think the first 2 days they do a very good job. And for a teenage boy who's now alone in the world, and he has to accept this, to call people and say, my parents are dead, my sister is dead, he has to relive that with every phone call. And the more he says that, the more it's going to have to become real to him. So I could see him sort of wanting, if he's in a stage of denial, which everyone's going to be in at a certain point, not wanting to live the reality of actually having to say, my dad and mom are dead, and they were violently murdered. The other thing is, I know that the police say that 3 days they had a funeral and in the Muslim faith, the family has to prepare the body. That's working under the premise that Atif was very religious. I don't think he was.
No, he was not religious. He was not religious.
And if he never had a death in the family, he may not know that it was the family's responsibility to prepare the body, because he may just have never lost anyone in that family.
Okay. I might give him that. But 500 people showed up for that service. And that was the day they left for Canada. And I just want to deal with their leaving for Canada in a second. But before we go on to that, they were interviewed multiple times during that 3-day period. The police put them in a motel. And the first time when the police asked Atif if he had known anyone that would want to kill his family, he said, no one. And then on another interview, he said he remembered that his mother saying that this family had enemies, and he thought it was a different sect, Muslim sect, that might have targeted his family. So that is an incongruent statement.
Well, I mean, that could be explained with,
absolutely,
when
can be explained.
he first asked about it, it didn't occur to him.
Right.
Like, no, I have no idea who would do this. And then as you're sitting and thinking for days, you then remember something your mother once said.
Right.
And I don't know how, controversial this True East thing actually was. It may have been.
Mm-hmm. What is the True East thing?
Can
you explain it?
1 degree east
Uh-huh.
than they were praying to. I honestly do not know how controversial that would have been among the Muslim community if it was really that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know, I don't think that it's worth killing them.
Well, when you know that the perpetrator showered in the house, it's hard to imagine a bunch of Muslim killers or one Muslim killer or any stranger showering after murdering an entire family.
Yes.
That seems to be someone who's familiar.
But if this was professional killers, they wouldn't have used an aluminum bat. They would have used a gun. They would have been in and out.
Right.
And they wouldn't have caused that much damage.
So let's talk about, you have
but
strong...
if we're going to use the argument of, people get fanatical about their religion. And if I don't know how true this is. Mm-hmm. But I do know fanatical people in other religions, and I think that religion makes people more irrational than anything else does. And if somebody's that upset and believes that somebody else is actually going against their God, that could explain the brutality too. I don't think it's likely at all that anybody would shower in the house. And Sebastian's hair was in the shower. He was also staying there. So it's something where, is it strong enough evidence to convict them? And is it possible that it happened? Is it possible that there's another explanation for it? And when you take the confession out of it, there's really not much there. Right.
True. So let's talk about, 3 days, the police put them up in the hotel. They were asking them questions. I thought this was really interesting that the police came looking for them at the motel, and they found them at the Barnes and Nobles on a hunch. I thought that was so interesting, because I guess they
Why would they The police went there on a hunch?
Yeah, because I guess they had
That's
said
a
in the
weird
interviews
hunch.
that they liked to go to Barnes and Noble. They had been
All
there
right.
the previous day, so they went there. They tracked, and there they were looking at magazines, and asked them more questions. But so they went the third day. They went. This is the day of the funeral to talk to them. One of the police officers, and they were gone. And half an hour later, Atif Rafay's family, extended family, shows up to see him, and they're gone too. So wait, hold on. The family did call and ask if they were being held, and the police said no, which means that they're free to leave. So it was okay for them to leave, but the custom agents did say that they were pale and shaky going through customs, as
Sure.
which I'm not saying is evidence of guilt, just interesting. And so the police believed that they fled, and so did the Supreme Court of Canada. What do you think? Did they flee?
No, I don't think they did. I think that if I was 19 years old, my family lived in Canada, let's pretend I wasn't involved. Mm-hmm. If I was 19 years old with my friend and staying with my friend's family, and the family was violently, brutally murdered, and I was staying in a hotel for 2 days, my parents would absolutely, my father would come down and get us and bring us home. You would, when you're 19 years old and you're staying in a hotel room, you just went through a traumatic event, you want to go home. Mm-hmm. If I had a cold at 19, I remember being in college, having a cold and wanting to go home. And there's something comforting about home. And I don't think that's fleeing. I think that's normal for 19.
But so comforting that they only spent 2 weeks with the family before moving in with friends. That's what I found sort of negates that theory.
Yeah, but this was something where, they were in a hotel room, mm-hmm. which is uncomfortable to begin with. They are stuck in there for days. And I can tell you, Atif is a little bit of a different story. But I know my parents would have said, bring your friend with you, because my parents their position would have been, this poor kid lost his family. He has mm-hmm. nothing. Bring him with you. And they would want to take care of him mm-hmm. and baby him. And my parents would say, you need to come home.
Right.
And that's what I would want to do. If my option was being in my house, my parents' house, and being taken care of, and having them make dinner, and taking a shower in my own house, and sleeping in my own bed, and after I just witnessed that, I wouldn't have waited 48 hours. Mm. I don't think that that's bizarre. And my question is, if Atif I don't know if Atif's family had actual family in Washington.
I don't think they did.
They all lived in
I think they did. I was trying to find that, and the only information I could find, because we had talked about it a little bit, you had insightfully brought it up, that point, and all I could find was that his relatives lived in Canada, so if none of his family is there, if he's really unaware of this funeral thing, and pretending they didn't know about it, about the 3 days in preparing the body, this kid now he never lived in this town. He never lived in this area. His parents moved there 6 months ago. He doesn't know a soul. His best friend is going home. Mm-hmm. I think it's absolutely natural that the best friend in the family would say, come home with me. And he could go back to the area where the family lives in Canada, Sebastian's family lives in Canada, their friends are all in Canada, or his other option is staying in a hotel room by himself. Yeah. So I don't think it's that bizarre. I think that once they get back there and refuse to talk to the police, that's very bizarre. But I will give them the pass of going to Canada. Right. Let me just read what the Supreme Court of Canada said on this issue. We accept that when the respondents, meaning Burns and Rafay, are in British Columbia, they are, quote-unquote, at home. They are also using home as a safe haven. A murderer who flees the scene of a crime across an international boundary is seeking a safe haven, irrespective of whether he or she holds citizenship.
Yeah, but they know where they were. It's not like they were fleeing to Tijuana. to disappear. They contacted the consulate and said, I'm going home. This is my parents' address. And the father called. So I imagine somebody fleeing internationally as going into Mexico and going and hiding. Yeah, so they can't be found.
Right. Those are all really good points. My issue is...
And also, I think that you can separate them in this. Because Sebastian is going to want to go home. That's what he's going to want to do. It's not his family. His family's at home. Atif is a different story. So putting them together, to me, doesn't make sense.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. Atif, this is my issue with Atif, is that you don't contact any of your family members. And as someone who lost... my father died a month after I turned 20. So, right around the age that... It's not even my whole family, just my dad. I wanted to be around my family, anyone who knew my dad, my family friends. I wanted to be in touch with them. I wasn't avoiding not calling them or not. But you want to let people know because you want to share the grief. He doesn't let anyone know, and he doesn't know that they're coming to Washington for the service.
This was a very sudden event where he now has lost his entire family. And if he calls, the more he calls people, the more he tells them, the more he has to admit that to himself. And at 19, to be left alone and your family slaughtered and gone, that's a very hard thing for you to accept the reality of.
Wait, are you arguing that they want comfort or they don't want comfort?
So I'm arguing that everybody handles everything differently. And in every family, when there's a funeral, there's always that relative that goes missing.
So you're saying he wants to go home for comfort, but he's also shut down and doesn't want to talk to anyone in his family and is denial.
I'm arguing that it could be any number of things.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I just don't think that them going back to Canada and calling the consulate and saying, this is the address we'll be at. We will be, and the Sebastian's father calling, and everyone knowing exactly where they are is not fleeing. When you flee internationally, you go into hiding.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think I think you're making a great argument. I think it's. I don't agree with it totally. It's certainly not the textbook definition of fleeing. If
I was going to flee internationally, you're not going to find me.
Right.
I'm not going to give the consulate the address of where I am.
Right. Good. All those are good points.
What's the purpose of fleeing?
Right. It's just, again, I can't believe you don't call anyone in the family or don't want even the comfort of anyone in the family to be near you. And you just miss them. They show up at the motel and you're not there. You're gone with your friend.
If he's in denial, which is a stage of grief, and he doesn't want to accept this, he doesn't want to see his family. Because if he sees his family, they're going to want to talk about it, and he's going to have to accept it. And he may not have been at a point emotionally to be able to accept it. It's much easier for you emotionally to pretend this isn't real and to go to your friend's house and pretend your life was exactly the way it was a week ago, that your family's still alive. They're just in Washington. Emotionally, that's a much easier thing to do than to accept you will never see your parents again.
Right. You're arguing that everybody's different, but that everybody goes through the stages of grief and that he's going through the stages of grief.
Well, everybody goes through the stages of grief. They just go through them differently. And they also the amount... Okay. Well, it's true, though.
I mean, isn't the stages of grief stages of behavior?
The way I handle denial may be very different than the way you handle it. And also, it's different lengths of time. It may take me a half an hour to be in denial. It could take someone else 3 weeks. So it could be argued that I don't see this as... I think anybody in that situation who was Sebastian Burns would have absolutely went home. Mm-hmm. I think if Atif knew no one in that area, that he would absolutely go with his friend because he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have a home anymore. So I just don't think that's really proof of guilt. If you put this kid, let's pretend that they didn't do it.
It's not proof. We're not staking
I just don't think that's the strongest evidence of their guilt.
No,
I think
definitely
that after
not.
they arrive in Canada, that's where it gets good.
No.
That's where they start looking guilty.
Right.
I don't think that's fleeing.
Yeah, and we will. I think this is going to have to be in two parts because we are getting close to the end. But I'm not arguing that this is that all that they're guilty just because they left. I'm just saying it's very strange the way he acted with his family is very odd. Very odd.
No, half the people that see this think exactly the way you do. So it's these are the two sides to it, and who knows, It's that yours are very, I'm coming from the place of, I'm going to imagine that I wasn't involved. Mm-hmm. What would I do?
Right.
And now if I put myself in the place of, if I was involved, what would I do? Okay. And I don't know. I would want to get away from it. But either way, even if I was involved or not involved, for a short time, I would want to get away from it no matter what. Because it's absolutely hard to face, or I'm fleeing. But if somebody's telling me that I'm fleeing internationally, I'm not going to give you my address.
True.
I'm not going to tell you where I am.
Good point. Well, we have so much more to get to, but it's going to have to be
very interesting points.
It's coming up in part 2. We're going to deal all with Mr. Big Stings. What happened?
3 corrections officers witnessing Sebastian Burns and his lawyer getting it on.
Yes, Sebastian Burns has sex with his lawyer, or was it just a hug that went too far? Stay tuned. Yes.
Well, one of the corrections officers said to the sergeant, "How is this still going on?" Because they were watching from above. Like, why? What? So they had to know people could see it.
I don't know any other. I've heard rumors of other cases where this has happened, but I don't remember any other lawyer and client getting caught in the act. If you know of a case, put it in the comments. Meredith Elizabeth, I can't wait to talk to you some more about this in part 2. And
I can't wait to talk about the lawyer.
Me neither. Thanks so much.
Thank you.